It's time to move on. My SUV was parked in the airport's long-term parking lot. I figured it would take me about 2 weeks before anyone noticed that the car had been sitting for too long. I headed to the Delta terminal carrying only my briefcase and duffel bag. In my briefcase, I had all my identification cards, several $1,000s in various denominations, and my travel documents. Everything seemed completely normal, unless you knew me. After all the documents were issued in a different name, but where photographs were required, there was my face, including my driver's license and passport. I was starting a new life under a new identity. I entered the terminal and began the process of going through security to board my flight. SA is a very efficient organization. They checked my ticket. They scanned my briefcase, wallet, and car keys. I did not have bombs, water bottles, or other prohibited items in my bag or on me. They correctly decided that I was not a terrorist and let me through. My next stop was the men's room, where I entered a stall and began taking off my outerwear. Underneath, I had another set of clothes. I went from being a business person to being a tourist returning from vacation. Now I was wearing a loud shirt, shorts, and summer shoes. I came out of the restroom and merged with the passengers who had flown in from Las Vegas. I looked like just another tourist returning from Fun City. I followed the crowd to baggage claim. I walked over to an inconspicuous wheeled suitcase standing alone on the conveyor belt. Since no one was paying attention to it, I grabbed it and left through the exit doors. I walked over to the transport between the terminals and boarded. 10 minutes later, I got off the tram at another terminal. I went into the men's room, took off another layer of clothing, and put it in the stolen suitcase. I went to the check-in counter, dropped off my stolen luggage, used one of my new IDs, and received my boarding pass. Instead of going to the TSA, I headed to the area where all the stores are. I got lost in the crowd and slowly made my way to the exits. Soon I was back on the tram and heading towards the Continental Terminal. This time I was actually going to board a plane and leave the airport. Soon I was on one of their international flights. I have successfully transformed myself into a different person. My new life begins now. My cheating wife will never find me or my money. I think I should tell you what inspired me to play this game of identity change. I'll start by telling you about myself. I was born in Western New York in 1960. I graduated from high school about halfway through my class. I wasn't particularly impressive academically or physically. I guess you could say I was a normal kid. My parents were not wealthy professionals. Mom was a housewife and Dad worked as a builder. I attended a local college and lived at home. During the school semester, I worked part-time in fast food, and in the summer I worked in construction with my dad. My grades in college weren't great. I barely stayed at 2.6 for the entire 4 years. All the time I spent working, I didn't put much effort into my studies. I did as much as was necessary to get through. I graduated from college with a business degree and went out into the world to make my name known. But I was surprised when none of the big guys wanted to hire me. I guess my average grades from an average college in a simple business program didn't really stand out among all the superstar graduates. So I spent my time looking for a job rather than a prestigious position. Finally, I found a job with a small property management company. I was not given a separate office with a secretary. I was given a desk, a phone, and a lot of responsibilities for little starting money. My college dreams of a white shirt, a dark suit, and a 9-to-5 job were shattered. I soon learned that in a small business, everyone has to be a jack of all trades. I have pursued tenants for back rent, assisted with evictions, and interviewed potential tenants. I even helped the maintenance staff clean and paint for the new residents. I didn't make a lot of money, but I learned the real estate business by doing everything hands-on. And during the learning process, I fell in love. Not into a beautiful woman, but into the real estate business. My boss, the owner, noticed my growing passion for the business and guided me. He had several adult children, but none of them wanted to follow in his footsteps. It seems I have become the child he always wanted, someone to whom he could pass on his knowledge. One day, he called me into his office. "Billy, look at these bank withdrawals and tell me what you think might be a good investment for us," he said. I've never done this before, I justified myself. Don't worry, I'll check your references before we decide. Oh, I'd like to see the results right after lunch. Lunch in his company was at 12 Ezo. It was now almost 10 O's. Damn, he didn't give me much time, I thought. I skipped lunch and spent the next 3 hours studying the advertisements. I found a few that I thought he might like. At exactly 1:00 p.m., I walked into his office and presented my recommendations. He listened to me for almost an hour before interrupting. So far, everything you have chosen is complete nonsense, was his only comment. Come here and I'll show you how it's done, he added. We spent the rest of the week sorting through the selections. When we were done, we selected a few properties that had great potential. I learned a lot that week. I also learned that my humble boss was a real estate genius. He bet on 4 of our picks and only won 1. It was a 4-unit residential building built in the early 1910s. It was located on the border with an area where young married couples and students lived. The building needed serious renovations, but we bought it very cheaply, and the bank agreed to provide all construction loans and defer mortgage payments for 6 months. In the end, this meant that we bought the building with almost no down payment and had all the money we needed to renovate it. At the deal, he handed me the keys and said, "This is your project. Start tomorrow." Over the next 6 months, I experienced a greater range of emotions than a person should. I experienced ups and downs and learned more about the rental business in between. By the time the first mortgage payment was made, I had already rented out all the apartments and began to confidently move forward. Soon after, my boss surprised me again. "Bill, sign these papers for that 4-flat house we bought." "Of course, but why?" I asked. "Because I'm transferring ownership to you. It's your building now." "What?" I exclaimed. "Bill, I'm getting old, and I'd like to pass on my knowledge to someone. I hope you'll let me pass it on to you. My kids will probably sell all the property I own when I die, as is their right. So we'll get started. To introduce you to your own real estate business, please accept my little gift." That's how I started. I soon became Bilko Properties, LLC. My friend and mentor died about 5 years later. True to his prediction, his children sold everything. They wanted to get the maximum price for everything and found a buyer who was willing to pay. By that time, I already had 15 of my own objects. All were in good areas and were fully leased. My financial model was built on 50% rental income. This meant that if half the building was rented out, it covered all the costs of that building. Most of my buildings were 100% occupied. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't in trouble either. I was fine. I purchased several commercial properties when the guy who bought my late boss's business went bankrupt. He thought that hiring a lot of employees and spending all his time on the golf course was all that was needed. Luckily for me, apparently he was wrong. I was 30 years old when I met the woman who would eventually become my wife. I bought a commercial property in a pretty good area. She and her friend rented one of the offices to start a decorating business. When they met me, I was dressed as usual, like one of the workers. They were both dressed like they were on the cover of a fashion magazine. I think as interior designers, they had to make an impression, and they really made an impression on me. Wendy was the more assertive partner, and she won my heart. In my little head, I imagined her standing in front of a house covered with vines, with 2 small children, waiting for her husband to return from work. I imagined myself as this husband. When I told them the rent, I could see from their faces that they couldn't afford it. "Since this building is pretty empty," I lied, "there was only one other vacancy. I can offer you an introductory rent for the first year," I offered. "How much less?" they asked in unison. "About double, if it's not too much. The owner has some flexibility in setting introductory rates." They took advantage of my generosity and signed a 1-year lease with an option for another year at a lease rate to be determined. "Can we get the owner's name and address to thank him?" asked Wendy. I gave them my mother's maiden name with a fictitious name and a company mailbox. I explained that the owner did not like to be disturbed, so a short letter would suffice. Over the next year, I helped them with all their problems, dressed like an ordinary worker. I watched their small business slowly take off. By the start of their second year, they renewed their lease at a higher rate. The rate was still about 25% lower than what all other tenants were paying. As I said earlier, they were truly beautiful. Wendy, the one I liked, told me one day that her partner was getting married and moving to the West Coast with her new husband before her lease was up. She asked, "Can I break our lease? I don't think I'll be able to pay it when my partner moves out." "I'm not sure about terminating your lease, but I can still reduce the rent to the previous level. My boss doesn't like empty offices." In fact, I didn't want her to leave. Her face lit up with a big smile, and I received a kiss. This kiss decided everything for me. I was in love. After we parted, she looked at me with a different look and gave me a special smile. This was the beginning of our relationship. A year later, I found myself at the altar making my vows. By the time we had been married a year, we had a daughter. Wendy had a hard time with pregnancy and childbirth. Her doctor recommended that she not have any more children. She underwent the necessary medical procedure. Our sex life remained as good as ever, but her desire for sex had diminished. Mine is not. As I said, Wendy's desire has diminished. Wendy has focused her efforts on her business ever since. She never realized that I was much more than a simple day laborer for some rich landlord. She began to treat me with little respect. She began to see herself as the main breadwinner in the family. I tried to tell her that I actually owned a lot of real estate, but she never let me finish. Every time I started talking, I heard, "I don't want to hear about your job. It's boring." I accepted her opinion of my importance in order to save my family. She was still beautiful, and I was just ordinary. By accepting her humiliation, I could save my beautiful wife and daughter. My daughter soon became the love of my life. When I wasn't dealing in real estate, I spent every free moment with my daughter. Watching this little girl grow up was my only reason for living. Wendy and I grew increasingly distant from each other. She was seduced by her rich and powerful clients. But I continued to buy real estate. I kept some properties for the long term, others I quickly resold, making a good profit. I was slowly amassing a fortune that she knew nothing about. Wendy became increasingly disdainful of me and more distant. I was soon sent to the spare bedroom to sleep. The reasons for my expulsion were listed as follows: "You snore too much, toss around and disturb my sleep, and of course, you smell like a small worker." At first, I was allowed into her bedroom once a week, but over time this was reduced to once a month. The only reason I put up with it was because of my daughter. If I ran into Wendy and she filed for divorce, everyone knows the mother gets the baby and the husband gets the bills. I loved my daughter too much to accept being cut off from her life by a selfish wife. I directed my frustration and loneliness about your real estate business. I ran my company like a secret mission with great passion. I had interconnected corporations, multiple mailboxes, multiple offices, and most of my employees worked in different buildings. There were only two people in my main office, my faithful accountant and me. Everyone except my accountant thought I was just another employee there. I never corrected their mistakes. By the time my daughter Amy was 15, I owned about $25,000 worth of real estate without a mortgage and another $50,000 with some form of mortgage debt. They were under different names and at different addresses of these corporations. All rent payments went to different mailboxes. Part of the rent went into offshore numbered accounts to avoid paying taxes. By this time, I began to bring in serious money. I had almost 100 properties. These were no longer the simple 3 or 4 family apartment buildings with which I started. These included large residential complexes, shopping centers, commercial office space in 10-20-story buildings, and one large shopping center. Amy and I have become close friends over the years. I was the parent who was there for her. If she was playing sports, I would cheer in the stands. If she was sick, I would sit by her bed and hold her hand. She and I spent hours together at the mall, buying all the things a mother and daughter usually do. Except Amy's mother was too busy living her wonderful life, and I had to replace her. Wendy was also successful in her business by that time. Because I never boasted or changed my lifestyle, she still considered herself the real moneymaker in the family. I never corrected her because I didn't want her to think that I might have money and divorce her. My wife looked at me as if I was nothing more than a loser who had stolen her success. She no longer hid her contempt for me. To be a second-class citizen in our house, I need a promotion. Although I accepted her attitude towards me, I also began to hide more of my wealth abroad. When Wendy decided to move up, I didn't want to be left penniless. Wendy's job as a decorator required her to hire very artistic people. These guys were bothering me. Wendy noticed that they were bothering me and tried to make my life miserable every time I was in her office. She tried her best to make gay guys her assistants. Wendy simply enjoyed these moments. I didn't do it. This was just another way for Wendy to show her contempt for me. To stay married and with my daughter, I turned into a weakling. Wendy. My husband Bill was a nice enough guy, but he had no ambition. I was an energetic person and always tried to improve my lot. Bill was just holding me back. Okay, he was an ordinary lover and the father of an only child. He treated our daughter like a princess. He was always by her side. But he didn't do anything for me. I wonder what I saw in him. He was just average. He was content with a dead-end job running errands for a reclusive real estate giant. He was always a good guy when I started my business with my friend Millie. He was like an errand boy for the owner. I was able to trick him and get all kinds of rental benefits, as well as a lot of extras. During our second year, Millie and I decided we weren't meant to be partners. I was aggressive. If the client was a man, I would flirt and let him think that he might have a chance to sleep with me if he handed over his business. If the client was female and curious, I satisfied her curiosity with business. Millie is not me. She had morals. I liked to fool around. Millie and I separated before our second year of work was over. She moved with her boyfriend to the West Coast. I was so bad to her that she just left, leaving me the business and all the assets. I didn't give her anything in return. I was a little worried about whether I would be able to pay the full rent on my fancy office without Millie's help, so I turned my feminine charm on Bill. I received reduced rent for another year. I kissed him for the first time as a sign of gratitude and as a temptation. But after the kiss, I realized that I liked kissing him. Maybe because I haven't had good sex with either a man or a woman for over a month now. I guess I was a little needy. For all his faults, Bill was a pretty good lover. Bill was very attentive. As the old saying goes, ladies come first. I'm used to insensitive male lovers. But Bill was so boring outside the bedroom. He did not follow current events or popular authors, artists, or other famous people. If anyone tried to start a conversation with him at a party, he quickly gave up. All Bill could talk about was real estate and accounting. And these two topics killed most of my friends with a boring death. I tried to take him to the opera, philharmonic concerts, and current plays. All that happened was me fighting to keep him awake, because if he snored, I would be in an awkward position. Since I was in the decorating business, I was required to attend various charity events to promote myself and get noticed. When I took Bill to these events, he usually just sat at our table and didn't add anything to the evening. He didn't even dress particularly nicely. He was more of a liability than an asset there. I probably should have worked on his image, but I was too busy expanding my business. One day, I received an invitation to a charity event. This time, I didn't tell Bill until it was too late for him to change his previously planned plans. Bill, I'll go to the event even if you can't attend. It's important to my business, and you know I'm responsible for our standard of living, I argued. But Wendy, wouldn't it look bad if you went alone? Asked Bill. I'll take one of my decorators with me. It was at this event that I met James, the man who became my lover. I stood at one of the bars, looking for my companion. I suspected he'd snuck off with one of the other guys at the party, leaving me to fend for myself, when this handsome man struck up a conversation with me. Sorry, but I couldn't help but notice that your companion left you, James said. My name is James William Hawthorne, and I would be pleased to accompany you for the evening, if that is okay with you. The first thing that came to my mind was, God, he's so beautiful. He was well-dressed, spoke well, and seemed rich. I accepted his offer for the evening. We had a great time together. I started to wonder what it would be like to sleep with James. My husband, Bill, loved me, but the rest of the time Bill was just terribly boring. About a week after that, I received a phone call from James. Hi, Wendy. Would you like to join me for lunch? I have an office that I've been thinking about remodeling, and I'd like to get your opinion. That's how it all started. Within a month, we became lovers. We started meeting 2 or 3 times a week in different hotels. He was my lover. I'm not saying he was better than Bill. James treated me like a woman of easy virtue, and Bill treated me like a queen. Being with James was exciting. I'm tired of Bill's tender love. I wanted James' dominance, so I decided that I wanted an apartment for myself. This would be a place where James and I could spend all our free time together. So I developed a plan and started executing it. Bill, I began, I'm looking to rent an apartment in the city. I spend too much time commuting between my office and this ugly farm. It's almost an hour each way, and I could use that extra time better for work. I know you like this farm, but I need to be closer to the city. You and Amy can stay here. There's no need to disrupt your life. But Wendy, he began. I interrupted him. This is not discussed. I have already decided. I have already chosen one of 2 options and will move by the end of the month. I noticed the offended expression on Bill's face. Don't worry, honey. I'll still be home on the weekends for you and Amy. I started my plans. James helped me choose a very prestigious apartment just minutes from my office. To make Bill feel part of it, I showed him the apartment and asked if he approved of my choice. Before he could respond, I said, I knew you'd like it too. I'll use it to show off my decorating skills. As we left the building, I noticed that the building manager knew Bill. I just assumed they met at some real estate event that Bill always attended. Bill, the day Wendy rented an apartment in the city so she wouldn't have to commute every day from our farmhouse, as she said, I knew my marriage was over. I suspected she had a lover, but I still wasn't sure. Now I was sure. Wendy never knew I owned an apartment complex. This was one of my more prestigious homes. My manager saw me and wanted to talk, but I pretended that we only knew each other briefly, not employer and employee. Later, he told me about my wife and her lover. My heart broke. I probably still loved Wendy, but I didn't know how I could survive this betrayal. The only thing I could do was gather enough evidence of her infidelity and poor moral character so that I could be appointed as guardian. My manager told me that my wife and her lover chose the apartment together, and he filled out the application with her. They rented an apartment together. This was their love nest. We decided to install video and audio surveillance in the apartment before Wendy could move in. I had enough money to pay for the work and installation of equipment in the manager's office. Residents thought a new building security system was being installed. This time I made sure Wendy paid full rent. In fact, it was slightly higher than all the other apartments. But since her current boyfriend was paying the bills, I didn't care. I made sure that the apartment was registered to us, because I didn't want some dodgy lawyer saying that the information I was collecting through video and audio recordings was inadmissible in court. I started collecting evidence for a divorce. Since Wendy had now effectively moved out of our house, my monthly visits to her bedroom had ceased. Although she promised that she would be home on weekends, she never came. When Wendy decided to give our daughter Amy and me a visit home for the weekend, Amy was thrilled to see her mother again. Amy was at the age when she needed her mother by her side. She needed to connect with a woman and engage in girl talk. My father was no longer suitable for this. Amy began to idealize her mother and Wendy's lifestyle. I thought it was just a phase Amy was going through, so I made concessions. Little did I know how wrong I was. When Wendy blessed me with a visit to my bed, there was nothing more I could do. Bill, what's wrong with you? She asked after an unsuccessful attempt at making love. We haven't had sex in months. If I didn't know better, I'd think you had a girlfriend. Sorry, Wendy, I have too much on my mind to focus. It'll be better next time, I promise. The next time never came. Wendy's rent checks from her boyfriend would arrive at the rent collection mailbox, where they would eventually reach me. I copied them and deposited the originals into the bank. Many of you are wondering why I didn't take revenge on him while he was sleeping with my wife. Don't be disappointed, I did it. The banker with whom I did business for my company was a good friend of mine and also a good friend of the bank manager of my lover's wife. Just for fun, we started keeping tabs on his finances. We soon learned that he was living paycheck to paycheck and depended on floating time between deposits and withdrawals to stay afloat. His accounts were so small that if his rent check for my wife's apartment was deposited at a certain time of the month, they would bounce for insufficient funds, or better yet, cause several of his wife's checks to be returned for insufficient funds. Do you understand? So we started playing with his scores. Soon, my company not only began to receive charges from him for reimbursement of commissions on checks and overdue a lot of rent payments, but he also paid bank fees on checks written by his wife, which also bounced. Soon, to his embarrassment, many of her checks were rejected by her favorite stores. Our plan worked perfectly. Due to all these attacks on bounced checks and collections, his credit rating was lowered. His credit card companies didn't like it. Although they didn't actually close his accounts, they did take another more appropriate measure. They continued to lower his credit limit to exactly the amount he owed, effectively preventing him from charging any money. This also affected his wife's use of joint cards. As you can imagine, she was a little upset about this because no woman wants to have her credit card declined. I enjoyed that shit back then. Not only did he get $200 to $300 in late fees and bounced check costs, he also had to explain to his wife how these errors happened without mentioning that it was the fault of my wife's apartment complex and their deposit habits. Oh, I'm sure there were some interesting conversations about family finances in his house. My next break was heaven sent. My wife consulted her doctor about women's problems. The smear results showed that she had some form of cancer. Our relationship by that time was such that she didn't tell me anything about it. She just told me that she has female problems and needs surgery. The truth came out when my daughter Amy, then 18, let the cat out of the bag. She told me she was going to stay with her mother. Amy, why? I asked. Have I really been such a bad father to you? No, Dad, no, but Mom needs me. She has cancer, and you don't love her anymore, but I still do. I want to help my mom get through these next months until she gets better. I missed my daughter, but I had to carry out my plans. If Amy chose to be with her mother rather than with me, then so be it. As much as I wanted my daughter to be with me, she chose her mother. I think she really needed to help her mother become complete. Amy has already grown up. And besides, living with her mother might reveal to Amy what her mother was really like. I went to church the next Sunday. It had been many years since I last set foot in the house of the Lord, but I wanted to take a moment to thank him. That's right, I didn't pray for Wendy's recovery, I thanked the Lord for what he gave her. It was the best thing he could do for me. Wendy suffered, and Wendy's lover paid for everything, but received nothing in return. He had to look after Wendy. I watched on one of the tapes how he treated Wendy. He left her for a long time until he decided to help her. Amy must have noticed because she was the one taking care of her mother. I contacted my lawyer. I explained that I wanted a divorce without any financial loss other than his fees. I also wanted him to make sure that his lover's wife had all the information she needed to kick him out. He gave me the usual speech about how this is a no-fault divorce state, and everything will be divided in half. No way, I thought. I had other plans. I left all the video and audio evidence, as well as copies of all the rent checks my wife's lover paid for her apartment through his account, and the rental application signed by the lover and Wendy. I wanted him to collect all the documentation, but not to submit it to court until I said so. My next step was to sell all my properties. This had to be done slowly because I didn't want to reduce the value of my assets too much. I was very lucky in this. Firstly, the real estate market was booming and several real estate firms were emerging in our market. As new firms competed with each other, they were constantly bidding on some of my best properties. I usually got more than I expected. I was pleased. In the meantime, I slowly removed all of our personal belongings from the house and sold it. Closing was scheduled for the day after my wife received the documents. After about 6 months, I signaled to my lawyer to give my lover's wife everything she needed to divorce him. He moved into my wife's apartment with my wife and daughter after his wife kicked him out. They were a happy family until they realized they had no money. His wife froze all his assets, and I made sure my wife's accounts were transferred to my offshore accounts. Both of them were as poor as church mice. One day, my building manager, Phil, called me from my wife's apartment and left me a message. All it said was, "Watch the video I am sending you today. Your daughter has problems." I stopped watching videos from the apartment Wendy months ago. My lawyer said we have more than enough evidence of her cheating to get a divorce. So naturally, I was concerned when I received a call from Phil, my building manager. The same day, the courier service refused the CD. The CD was in chronological order. This started about 4 months ago. My ex-wife's lover did terrible things to my adult daughter. I called my lawyer at 4 a.m. when I stopped crying and left him a message. In a message to him, I asked him to save her, to get her out of this apartment before someone kills her. I knew she was 18 now, and legally there was nothing I could do, but I had to try. Amy was still my little girl. Although I still had few feelings for Wendy, I couldn't ignore what was happening to our daughter. The next day, he returned my voicemail. He said he would think about saving Amy, but she was an adult now, and there was little he could do. Later that day, he called back. Alan reported that my 18-year-old daughter was pregnant and that it was caused by my wife's lover. Love Wendy was arrested for accessory to delinquency and numerous other charges. I didn't think he would justify the charges, but just in case, I sent the records from the apartment Wendy to the police and local media. Despite all the publicity that these recordings generated, I was sure that he would never work in the city again. The publicity also gave his wife more leverage in the divorce. He was in jail awaiting trial because he couldn't afford bail. My daughter was also imprisoned because there was no money for bail. Alan, my lawyer, and I were discussing Amy. Alan said I should keep her in jail, and he would see to it that she was put into a treatment program. He explained that if I posted bail for her, she would become another woman on the street with an addiction. The best thing to do was leave her where she could get some treatment, and he could keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, my wife was minding her own business while she was undergoing treatment. Me and a couple of her employees started our own decorating business, with my help, of course, and left my wife, who was taking most of her clients. Her business failed, and her landlord evicted her from her office space. She was broke and had no source of income. She didn't have health insurance. She called me and asked to include me in the policy, which I did. But the policy I had did not cover existing conditions. I've always been good at planning ahead. Well, that brings me to the present time in my story. I was on a plane to South America. I couldn't be tracked. I would soon be landing in Cancun and would have to change my identity once again when I boarded a plane to Europe. In Europe, I would make another crossing and go to warmer climes. This way my wife would never be able to find me. Before leaving for Australia, I called my lawyer Alan. Alan informed me that my daughter Amy is trying to contact me. She wanted to make peace with me. He told me that somehow she found out about all my wealth. My lawyer told her that I had been gone for a long time and that I could not be found again unless I wanted to be found. I told Alan to use some of my money to prepare Amy's defense. I also advised him to keep her in prison as long as possible because while there she was making progress in overcoming her addiction to illegal substances. I felt that if she went outside again, she would return to her old habits. 6 months later, I called my lawyer to inquire about the status of my divorce. My lawyer told me that a divorce was not necessary. My wife lost her battle with her cancer and died before the divorce was final because she had no money and we didn't get divorced. I picked up the cost of her treatment. She died in the charity ward of the hospital. She had no visitors at the time of her death. She died alone. I paid all her medical bills. I think I actually felt a little guilty. She was the love of my life, but her actions and greed drove us apart, and yet she still held a small place in my heart. I was out of the country and in hiding, and my daughter Amy was in prison when she died. Funeral Wendy did not have. Alan said, "Her ashes are waiting at the county coroner's office for someone to claim. If no one comes to claim it, she will be buried with all the other poor people in an unmarked grave." Alan fell silent and waited for my answer. I think he was waiting for me to offer to take responsibility for the remains. No, I thought. She has caused me too much pain and humiliation over the years for me to forgive her now. I asked about my daughter. She lost the baby in the 4th month. She is currently in prison serving a 12-month sentence, but she is in a good treatment program and seems to be making progress. What about Lover Boy? I asked. I already knew what happened to him because my friends took care of him for me, but I wanted to play dumb. He died in a fight in the prison yard. Prison doesn't like these types of criminals. Well, if Amy asks you to take care of her mother, give her the money she needs. If she is clean and free of addiction, support her with my money until she completes her education and can support herself. 4 years later, I stopped in town to visit Alan, my old lawyer. We haven't spoken for many years. He was retiring and closing his practice. I wanted to stop by and wish him the best in his retirement and give him a cash gift. He was a good friend. In fact, he was my only friend. I was a lonely old man. As I drove around town in my new Bentley, I experienced a lot of memories. Some of them are nice, and some of them, well, I took extra time to drive around and visit some of the property I once owned. Most of the neighborhoods I chose to buy apartments in have prospered over the years. My old assets looked good. Most of my old commercial properties have also started to appreciate in value. It's a pity that the divorce from Wendy forced me to sell these apartments and hide my wealth. I always wondered if I told Wendy everything I had, she might respect me more. It was already too late for this experiment. I parked in front of my lawyer's office and walked in. This building was one of the few that I still owned. I kept it because my law practice was located there. I wanted to keep him safe so he could look out for my interests. I wanted to give him this building now so that he would have something to provide for his old age, now that he is retiring. This was my gift to him. "Hey, old bastard," Alan, my lawyer, greeted me. Then we hugged and shook hands. The years that passed just disappeared as we both started telling each other everything we had done over the years. When we finally slowed down, he said, "Aren't you going to ask about your daughter, Amy?" "Not really, but I bet you'll tell me anyway." Actually, Bill, you'll be proud of her. When she was released from prison, she entered another rehabilitation program. She completed the entire program and then remained as an advisor. She got rid of her addiction. Alan continued. "Oops," the sarcastic part of me exclaimed, although a secret part of me was glad she did. No, really. Amy stayed there and also enrolled in the social worker program at our local college. She did very well. She completed the 4-year course in 3 years. She graduates next month. I was informed, "Besides, you paid for all of this. I accepted a liberal interpretation of your instructions. One more thing, Bill. You might want to meet your son-in-law, Frank Murphy, and your granddaughter, Vivian. The baby is now almost 7 months old and is now starting to really develop. Beautiful when she grows up. A real heartbreaker." Just like her grandmother, I thought. A real heartbreaker. Alan continued, "You also paid all their expenses beyond what their meager income could have covered, including a nanny named Chloe. I placed her in an apartment across the hall from the children and forced her to pretend to be nothing more than a useful helper, a neighbor who was bored in retirement and wanted to help. Her constant presence to look after the children and all that allowed No continue his studies and allowed Frank to progress in his work. I succumbed to the pressure and agreed to stay in town until graduation and watch the event. As graduation approached, Alan somehow arranged for us to attend not only the graduation ceremonies, but also the pre- and post-events. At one of the preliminary gatherings, I noticed my daughter and her husband. I was impressed that it had been many years since I had seen Amy, and she had inherited her mother's beauty. I always knew that my daughter inherited her mother's genes, but Amy turned out to be a real beauty. Amy was the spitting image of her mother, the only woman I had ever loved. I felt a slight sadness in my heart. I think this graduation will be a little harder for me than I thought. I pulled my friend away from the crowd and said, I don't want to interfere in Amy's life anymore, so don't expect me to run up and greet her. It's too difficult. Promise me this. I promise, he replied. The next day, Alan and I were sitting approximately in the middle of the stands. We heard the graduates announced as they crossed the stage. Their parents and friends applauded and cheered as they received their diplomas. When my daughter's turn came, her husband was standing with the child in his arms. I could see his tears from where I sat. The applause was louder for her than for the others. I felt a little proud in my heart. When my daughter reached the center, the dean stopped her. It is with great pleasure that I present you with this special award, Amy Murphy. You have been selected for this award by your fellow students and the institution. Mrs. Wiz Murphy, you are honored for your selfless gifts to anyone who needed any support. We all feel that your actions have resulted in more of your peers graduating from this class than any other class in the history of the school. Once you start studying here, you will receive a certificate. A citation signed by all members of this class, as well as the institution. Amy, we all love you and will miss you. Amy received a standing ovation when she crossed the stage. I was prouder to be a parent than ever. I think I felt more for her at that moment than when she was born. My little girl performed very well. I was happy for her. When the ceremony was over, I headed back to the car. But the aisles were crowded with students and visitors. As I made my way along with the crowd, I tried to keep my head down so as not to be recognized. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter, her husband, and grandson walking down the aisle next to me. Crap, I thought. I need to open the hole so I can crawl in there and hide. I couldn't find her and ended up trapped. My daughter and her husband didn't notice me, but my granddaughter did. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as she watched my every move. She held my son-in-law by the neck while watching me. By now, she was about 9 months old and seemed to have a mind of her own. She started chanting Bopa in her baby voice. Many children called their grandfathers this term. She began to sing, waving her arms and legs, trying to escape her father's grip. Amy reached over to take the baby from her husband when she looked where the baby was pointing. Unknown to me, Chloe showed my granddaughter a photo of me and tried to explain who I was. The girl really learned her lesson. To her credit, Amy didn't scream or pass out. All she said was, "Hi, Dad. Thank you for coming and supporting us all these years. About a month ago, Alan told us about your participation in our lives." I later learned that he had kept this small family under his protection for many years. He also told Amy that she had been using my money to pay for her education and unexpected expenses all these years. He played the father I couldn't, but he still gave me credit for it. I looked at her and smiled. I would never miss your graduation, even with tea in China, and paying your expenses was the least I could do. After all, I was the one who left you alone. Amy's husband looked at me and stumbled. He really didn't quite know how to handle the reunion. I caught his hand to hold him. My granddaughter grabbed me by the shirt and started screaming, "Bopa Yuppie." My daughter, Amy, spoke first. "Vivian wants you to hold her, Daddy. Do you want to carry your granddaughter?" Before I could make a decision, I found myself carrying a very excited little girl in my arms. She hugged me around the neck and told everyone in their ear that I was Bopa. I was hooked. This little child has entered my heart. Suddenly, I was a grandfather, father and father-in-law, and loved every minute of it. My years of loneliness seemed to be over. My heart began to heal. Soon we were standing in one of the large parking lots with Alan, my lawyer. "Bill, Let's get in your car and go to a restaurant so you can get reacquainted with your family. We have many years to go through. My brother-in-law, Frank, rolled over when he realized we were approaching a beautifully crafted $300,000 Bentley Mulsanne. He simply stopped and stared at the astonishment that crossed his face. I handed him the keys. "Do you want to go, son?" I asked. The glow of his grin outshone the lights in the parking lot. I think he wanted to drive the car. We drove across the parking lot to his beat-up old Ford to get a car seat and everything else needed when traveling with a small child. I looked at the car and made a decision. Tomorrow he will receive his own set of Bentley keys. Later I will buy myself another car. On the way, I found myself sitting in the back next to my granddaughter, who was between Amy and me. Little Vivian held my hand and chatted to me like any little child. There was a rather large lump in my throat. "Dad, we have something to talk about," Amy said. "I need to apologize to you a lot. I was a stupid, selfish child. I never realized how much my going to see my mother hurt you." "No, you don't need to apologize. I'm proud that your life has changed and you now have a wonderful little family. And I finally realized that many years ago you needed your mother, and she needed you too. I'm just sorry that you both were taken advantage of by that bastard James." "But Dad," I interrupted her by saying, "I would like to be a part of your new life if you will accept me. I also made a lot of mistakes in our relationship, and I would like to make amends to you. We have a lot to discuss, and I hope I never see this James again. He destroyed my mother with his lies and me with his actions. If Frank hadn't found me, I would still be in jail or dead. It took me a fourth try to overcome my addiction. Frank was the reason for my success. His love helped me overcome this final hurdle. Now little Vivian is my reason to stay clean. I, as her mother, want to share with her." Amy cried, not out of sadness, but out of family, for most of our trip. I think she finally felt complete. We talked throughout dinner, the next day in their apartment, and a few more days in my hotel. We were actually talking about next month. We reconciled all these years of pain and loneliness. In the end, we blamed all our problems on my late wife and her attitude towards me. We agreed that Wendy was a selfish person. She paid no attention to anything except her own desires. Wendy was beautiful on the outside, but empty on the inside. But I still missed her. I knew that no one on this earth would ever replace her in my heart. My daughter Amy realized that I was not the bad guy her mother painted me to be, but simply a guy who was much better than my late wife ever imagined. At one point in our discussions, Amy looked at me and said, "You still love her, don't you, Dad?" It still hurts me when I think about the contempt she had for me, but you're right, I think there's a part of me that still loves her. I was not a weakling. I loved her with all my heart, but a long time ago she cut me to the bone. I did what I had to do to save myself from death. My lawyer gave us a shock about 2 months after our reconciliation. One night over dinner with us, he asked, "What do you guys want me to do with Wendy's ashes? It's been sitting on the shelf in my office for a very long time." Well, you could have heard a pin drop at the table. The silence was broken by my granddaughter chanting, "I want a grandmother." Amy and I looked at each other. "Dad, I guess I thought that because I was in prison when she died, I would never have a chance to say goodbye. Now that I have met you and heard your story, I would like to tell my mother a lot. Can we go after her?" "Okay, I guess. There's something I'd like to tell her too, but I don't apologize for anything I did to her. After all the years of pain she put me through before she died, she deserved what I did to her." "Dad, I'm not saying what you did was wrong. Remember, I lived with her and that idiot. They deserved everything you did to them. I was a bitch to you. It took me hitting rock bottom in prison before I started to change my life when I realized what I did to you." Frank interrupted. "Dad, I met her at the orphanage where she worked as a counselor. I went to rehab there for problems with alcohol. She came back, and at that moment I fell in love with her. She helped me get rid of alcohol addiction, and I supported her attempts to get clean. Since then, we have not parted. In the end, We all agreed that Vivian should have some kind of connection with her grandmother, even if it was just a visit to the grave. And it would also give Amy and I the opportunity to express our anger at Wendy. Later that day, we received the urn from my lawyer's office. I put the urn in the trunk of the Bentley, remembering that Wendy never liked riding in the back seat because she was car sick. I was hoping the trunk would enhance the effect. I think I still had bad feelings towards my wife. We moved to Virginia, and I bought a small farm near a large city. My brother-in-law and I agreed to raise a few horses and open a small stable where city residents could keep their horses and ride them in the countryside. Wendy's ashes were eventually buried in the small family plot on our farm. The site contained the remains of a family that lived here in the mid-1800s and once owned part of the property. We cleared the area and put up a small picket fence to enclose it. We left room for a few additional graves. The last thing I did was make a headstone for Wendy. It said, Wendy Adams, 1956 to 1995. Cancer victim. She will be missed by all who loved her. We all forgive you. As the years went by, I noticed that my granddaughter was playing a lot with her books in that little cemetery yard. One day I asked her why. Because Grandma talks to me and helps me learn to read. She said it as if it was a completely normal occurrence. Papa, she says she's sorry for hurting you. Someday she will make it up to you for all this. She also told me that she now sees what a good person you are and would like you to forgive her. She also asks if she can wait here in the cold and dark until it's your turn. Then she wants to know if you will let her go out into the world with you. Then she can be with you forever. A little voice said in my head, and it was a good try, William, but I won't be car sick anymore. I fell to my knees and began to hug Vivian. Papa, why are you crying? Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.